Welcome back. Welcome to another lecture, and today we're going to learn about objects. So, objects are the second data structure in JavaScript, but it can be also a JavaScript type, and this is very interesting. So, objects allows us to group values, including other objects, to build more complex structures, and they're just a little bit more advanced than arrays. So, objects are a collection of properties. Now, create new file here. And before I just start explaining, so create new file called lecture 7, link it in the index.html. Now, what about the arrays? So the W3 schools, so if you search for JavaScript array methods, there's a whole bunch of lists here. So I didn't show you this page last time, but you should probably know that W3 schools is a place that you can learn a lot of things. Now, just make sure that you go through some of the methods here and practice them. That's it. So let's continue working with the objects. Now make a comment saying JavaScript objects. That's it. Let's write our first JavaScript object in order to understand what are the objects. So var student equal to curly brackets name. Let's put it here, Toby. Then we have age, 33. Then I'm gonna say occupation. Oops, it's gonna be web developer. Nice. Save this one. So our object is called student. And how we know it's object? Well, we have a curly brackets, and that's a very different from the arrays. With arrays, we have the other brackets, right? So that is something that is very different from the arrays. So the square brackets are different than these curly brackets, right? And also in arrays, we have indexes. In here, we don't have indexes. But what we do have here is property name and value. So this is called property name. This is a value. Or you will read somewhere it's called key value pair. And this is the key and this is the value. So property name and holds a value of Toby, property age holds a value of 33, and occupation holds the value of web dev. So that is the difference with the array. We had index-based structure, and now we have key value pairs structure, right? So that is a little bit pretty much difference. So how we can get the property from the objects, it's pretty much different to how we get the property from arrays. So we can access it with the name of the object, right, with the student. Then we need to use dot and the name of the property. So let's say I want to get the student name. How I can do this? Well, console.log, and first let me grab the student to see what the object will look like. Here it is. Now we see that it's object and the prototype is object. We don't have to worry about this part at this stage. So we have name, age, occupation, and that's pretty much it. Now, I want to access the name, so I can do console.log student. Now, in order to access the name, I will use dot and the property name. That's pretty much it. Save it. Then I get Toby. Now, if you want to get the age, you do the same thing with age. You do the same thing with occupation. So this is how you are get the name, age from student object, right? Very good. Now we know how to get the name, how to get the properties of the object. Also, same as the array, we can modify or add or remove properties from a specific object. So let's add student ID here. I want to have a student ID to this student object. So how we can do this? So student, I need to use student, that's the name of my object, then ID.id, and then I need to specify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, that's pretty much it. Save it. Now, console.log student object. Let's see if anything is changed. Very good. Now I have another property and a value. So this is how I can add things inside the objects. It's a little bit different than arrays, but it's very self-explanatory. So what do you think this will do? So if I do student.age, but I already have age, and I will set that one to 23, right? Save it, console.log, and say student again, because I need to access this one. Now look what happened. The age is there, but the values change because we already have the property called age, but we just set another, or we modify the value of 33 with 23. Now you know how to create a new property and how also you can modify the existing value of a property. That is pretty much it. Now the concept behind the data structures is very simple, and it's to keep things organized. So objects are very good for storing data, like the data we just created for this student or for users, but it can be just for anything or just about anything that can be classified as a good example what objects can be. Now the power of objects is that they can also hold an array of items. So let's create an array of items here, and what will be logical here is to put the subjects. So I'm just gonna put here subjects as an array, and inside this array I will have a couple of strings. Oops, sorry. So I will have calculus here, then I will have databases, then I will have C++ or Java programming, then I will have C++, then I will have cyber security, then I will have then I will have networking, and that's enough. That is pretty much cool. Now even if you put a comma here at the end, it will not throw you an error. And if you see this in your workplace or in other tutorials online, then you should know that this will not throw you an error, although we haven't specified anything down there, right? Okay, now how we can access this. For example, I want for this student Toby to access the C++. Well, let's go back in our browser, and we will have now the subjects array. So if I go to the student only dot subjects, that will give me back the array that we just specified before. But I want to grab this C++, and I need to know its what? ID, or its index. Now, if you're using Google Chrome, if you click on the arrow on your keyboard, up arrow key, and it will bring the last executed command. Now I need these brackets, square brackets, and I need to only provide the number 3 or the index in order to get the what? The subject C++. So this is how you can access the items within this object. So actually items within this array, right? And this array belongs to the student object. Very good. Now let's put it back here. So console log, and I'm gonna make sure that I just gonna copy the same thing. Now you're gonna have it for your own, so you can review this one later on. Now here I'm gonna say get the array item called C++ from student object. Very good. Now what I haven't told you last time, previous lecture, sorry, is that I can also have an array, and in that array I can have a student object. So why I didn't tell you this? Well, we haven't covered the objects, and it was not logical to say that array can hold an objects as well. So let me just show you how we can write that one. So create, I'm gonna say var here, and let's create student array, and this student array will have 3 objects. So how we can define an object? With these curly brackets, and every student will have student ID, and every object, sorry, will have a student ID and student subject count. Okay, now student ID, it will be, let's put them inside quotes, so it will be string, comma, and subjects count, it will be what? Subject counts will be, let's put a number here, 3. Okay, now next object, we need to separate them by a comma because this is considered as a single item, right? Because it's an array. That will be second item. This will be the third item. Let's put here 1. Let's put here 4. Let's change this one, add a couple of things here, and that's pretty much it. Now, if you put a semicolon there, console log this entire array, you will see that we do have, we do have array of length 3, but we do have inside 3 objects, and now I do see their indexes. So how I will access this subject count of 4? Well, first I need to know the name of our array, so I'm gonna do it here again, right? Then in these square brackets, I'm gonna define the index of this guy here that has 4 subjects, right? Because we said that I'm gonna grab the subject count from that guy. So number 1, it's in index 1. Now I just want to get the subject count, so dot subject count, and that is pretty much it. Very good. Now let me console log this for you guys. Put a semicolon there, and this is to get the subjects count of an object inside an array. Nice. So this is how we can define objects inside an array, and before that, this is how we can define an array inside an object. And it's a little bit different how we access them, but it's pretty much self-explanatory, right? I also want to mention functions that can be defined here inside an object. Now the functions defined in an object, they will be called methods. So this student object can have access to its own methods. Now let's create a method called paid, and that will be a function, right? Curly brackets, and inside let's just console log paid and exclamation mark. So that means that the student paid its own tuition fees, right? Now that is very good. So student has access to its own method called paid, and we're not gonna call them functions because they're methods of this student object. So how are we gonna access this method? So student name, actually the name of the student, right? This is the student object, then dot paid. And because it's a function, we need to use this brackets. Yeah. And if we have arguments, we need to pass some arguments. So save this one, go back to your browser, and here it is. We do have the paid printed out for us. Now, this leads us to something very interesting. And I just want to discuss about another JavaScript type called null. So this will be another JavaScript type that we're going to cover, and we were not able to cover it until now, but it is called null. So let's first talk about an empty object. So last lecture I showed you that we can have an empty array. Well, let's create var empty array that will be equal to, so we just declare and initialize the array, but we not have any data inside. So that is called empty array and empty object. And also the object can be defined with these curly brackets, right? Let's console log both of them. Now empty object first, or the array, doesn't matter. Let's do them in this order. Console.log and empty object. Oops. Save it, go back to your, and now you do have length of 0, and nothing inside of the object. So why, you will ask yourself, well, why we will need an empty object or an empty array? Well, imagine that we have a function that will take these two objects and it will fill them inside the function. So let's create a function called fill function. Well, you can create a better name for this one. And inside, I will say empty object dot name. So I will give it a name to Rick. Now, empty array. Let's put push here. Let's push an item inside the array, and the item name will be James. Nice. So we need to call the function fill function. It doesn't take any parameters. And again, we need to console log the both of the arrays. So now they were empty before. Now we create a function that will fill them. So this function can do anything to them. Can fill not just with name. It can have like the student, like age, or with the array, we can push more items inside, and we can save it. Now we have array of one item, right? And its index is 0, and we have an object with property name and value Rick. So that is how we can use these empty objects. But now, see, sometimes we need an empty array, an empty object to be declared outside here. That's why we declare them outside the function, and this is called a global scope, but because we can access these objects anywhere, even inside the function. That's why we define them globally here. If we define them, these two, inside here, the function, then we will not be able to access them outside the fill function. Do you understand me? That is why this is called global scope here. Everything that we're going to define globally, we can access them even inside the functions or outside the functions. It will work. So that is why we define them as an empty outside. So on the other hand, this leads to a very interesting and unique JavaScript type called null. And so let's set new object to null. And this will be a new JavaScript type called null. And we're here, we will say var null object, and that will be equal to null. So we can set the object to null, and let's give the object an age. So null object, or just a name, dot name, and it will be equal to Rick. Save it, and console.log null object. All right. So what do you expect to see? Do you expect to see now null object filled with the value Rick? Well, this will throw us an error, and it's an uncut type error. Cannot set property name on null. And why is this? So null object returns null value. The value null represents the intentional absence of any object value. It is one of the JavaScript primitive values, and it's treated as falsy for Boolean operations. And we will have use cases for this, and it's hard to wrap your head around at this stage, but it will be okay. We will handle this in future. But as you know, the value null represents the intentional absence of the object value. So when we define something like this to be null, then we do this intentionally, right? Okay, now we will define more, we will create more meaningful examples of how we can use null. Don't worry about it in future, but this is what null, and this is another JavaScript type. And you already see the empty one. That's cool. You see that, let's go from top. Now you know how to create an object with these curly brackets. We have properties and names of the objects. Arrays, we have indexes. Here we don't have it. Now we can access it by using dot and the properties here, right? Also, the students can have an array of items, and we can access them here like this. And actually that was for the students array. Here it is. All right. Also, we can have functions, and the functions inside the objects are called methods. Now we discussed about the empty objects or empty arrays and how we can fill them inside a function. And also we discuss about the null JavaScript type. And that is pretty much it for this lecture. Yeah, I'm sorry it was super long, but I had to explain it because in JavaScript, arrays and objects are very, very important. And you will see in future why I'm saying very important, because our next exercises will be pretty much of with arrays and objects. And yeah, you will see what we can do with them. So stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. Now,